How did all of the Outlaws of Thunder Junction mechanics come to be? Well, we've got a tale to tell you all about today. Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and joining us is a special guest. I did not work on the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set nearly as much as this person did. Welcome to the show, Jeremy Geist.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Geist. I'm a game designer on Magic the Gathering.
All right, so Jeremy, we're going to talk about Outlaws of Thunder Junction here in a moment, but quickly kind of give us a rundown of how you came to Wizards and how long you've been there and kind of what your background with Magic is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been playing Magic since Time Spiral. I joined Wizards through the Great Designer Search 3. Although I wasn't hired immediately, they offered me a contract position on the Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks. And then after that, I was offered a full-time position in 2021. Outlaws of Thunder Junction was the first draftable Magic set I ever worked on, and I was on it from towards the beginning of Vision till nearly the end of set design.
That's awesome. Yeah, the Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks takes me back, man. That was a fun little project for us to work on together. Do you remember which deck you worked on?
Yes, I worked on the Alayla precon.
Yeah, so you had to make Alayla and some of the new cards, right? That was pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was. I had a lot of fun making that deck list. That the card pool that we had access to led to some pretty interesting synergies. There was a Flying Matters sub-theme in the deck that I think people are generally happy with.
Yeah, those decks issued a lot of strong cards. Of course, Corvold and Shoe Lane came out of there, but you made Alayla, so you're fine. You're on the good list.
Absolutely. Alayla is the one everyone loves.
Okay, fantastic. Well, so tell us a little bit about your journey with Outlaws of Thunder Junction, because like you said, you started in on that as the first draftable set you got to touch. How long were you there for? How much of the set did you cover?
Yeah, let's see. So I started in November 2021. I was on till nearly the end when, it starts getting handed over more to play design and starts becoming questions of balancing. I would say I was on the team for about a year.
Awesome. And so for Outlaws of Thunder Junction, you were on all of these except for the play design part, right?
Yes. It is not common for someone to be on set design all the way through. I think I left while there were still a month or two left. Towards the end of set design, the team is mostly populated by play designers, and we're asking more granular questions about, like, should we tweak individual numbers on these cards or things like that? And a lot of the set has already been locked into place.
You mentioned vision design too. Can you just kind of recap what the difference between vision design and set design are, kind of what the different vibes are there, and exploratory as well?
So the three broad stages of Magic design before we hand it off to play design for rebalancing are exploratory design, which is where we do general exploration of the space we want the set to play in. So we'll come up with mechanics, we'll do very rough play tests. After a couple of months of that, it transitions into vision design, where we'll solidify our mechanics and themes that we want to see. And we will, for the first time, make a file of cards. This file is generally considered a placeholder, is expected to change many times, but we just use it to get a sense of how the mechanics play and to provide a framework for set design. After vision design, we move into set design, which is where we start designing a set for limited and earnest. We'll come up with draft archetypes, we'll create commons and uncommons, we'll make sure that everything is flowing well and playing nice. Eventually we'll add in rares and mythic rares. We'll do lots and lots of play tests, and then after all that, we will hand off to play design, and then they start tweaking numbers and coming up with the final shape of the environment. Right,
and so keep in mind, everybody, November 2021. So the set just came out basically, and November 2021 is, 3 years ago. So we take a long time making these things, and you have to kind of see the whole thing evolve, right? You saw it from more or less start to finish, you'd say.
I did. It was a great opportunity.
So what we're going to do today, because Jeremy has this kind of eagle's eye view of everything that went on in Outlaws of Thunder Junction with the mechanics, is we're going to walk through all the mechanics of the set. And Jeremy, you're going to tell us about how those mechanics came to be and how they evolved over the course of design, because I know some of them did not stay exactly the same the whole time. You ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's kick things off with crime, something brand new for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. When did this show up and how did this come to be?
Crimes were one of the first mechanics we came up with in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Mark Rosewater is very enamored with the idea that you could commit crimes in the setting because it overlapped Western's villain set and a heist set, which were all things that you'd want to commit crimes in. So we spent a lot of time discussing what committing a crime means in Magic, and we eventually arrived at targeting an opponent or any of their stuff. We felt it was important that for example, countering a spell is committing a crime because it feels like you're committing a crime. At various points, especially in early set design, we tried expanding what a crime means to, for example, destroying your opponent's creatures. We also messed around a little bit with what zones you could target things in that would count as committing a crime. But what we have at the end is pretty close to what we came up with in exploratory. It's pretty all-encompassing. There's only a few cards that target things that don't commit a crime, and we're pretty happy with how it played out.
What are some of the things that you talked about adding into the list of what could be crimes that didn't end up making it?
Things like destroying creatures. So currently things like wraths do not commit crimes. Other things that feel like crimes, like dealing combat damage to an opponent, possibly things like milling them. It's been a while, so I don't remember exactly what we considered, but part of it was also a worry that we wouldn't be able to have enough effects that commit crimes in limited, but we were able to find a lot of effects that targeted the opponent or their stuff, but weren't brutal against them. So things like milling them for a couple, draining for a life or two, things that count as committing a crimes and are generally good for you, but aren't, extremely strong or worth an entire card.
Right, it really makes you look for the word target, right? Because if you drain each opponent for 1 versus draining target opponent for 1, that is a huge difference in the world of committing crimes.
Yeah, it was an interesting distinction to make. As Magic is focused more towards Commander these days, often each opponent effects are stronger because you'll have 3 opponents. But in this set in particular, targeting became more important because it counts as committing a crime and you want those bonuses.
All right, so that's a bit on crimes. Now let's talk about something that came back. I mean, this has been in Magic for a very long time, but it's only been blown out a couple of times in Magic's history, and never quite like this, and that is deserts. How early did you guys decide you were going to do deserts?
We knew we were going to do deserts as soon as we knew we were going to do a Western set. It's an inherent part of the setting. Also, if you look back at deserts in previous sets, like Amon-Ket Block or even the original one in Arabian Nights, deserts tend to do slightly bad things to your opponents, so it was a natural fit for lands that could commit crimes. Oldest deserts in the file are the cycle of 10 deserts that commit crimes by dealing 1 damage to an opponent when they enter. These were based off of a similar desert in, I believe, Hour of Devastation that also pinged your opponent for 1 upon entry. We found that these lands were helpful for people playing decks such as green-white that didn't have a lot of options to commit crimes proactively. You could just put a few deserts into your deck and you would still get your crime triggers by playing them. We also thought it was interesting to have tapped duels that you wouldn't necessarily want to play on turn 1. You might want to hold them into your hand until you could get the crime trigger and have that mean something.
Yeah, that choice is so interesting in Outlaws of Thunder Junction Limited, right? Normally you're like, tap dual land, great, jam that on the first turn. But Outlaws of Thunder Junction, you're like, ooh, maybe on turn 4 I actually want to be able to play this to, proc my effects, and I think that's pretty interesting gameplay. So yeah, there's that cycle of 10 deserts, right, the dual lands, but how much overall desert presence did you decide to have? Because the footprint in the set is not super huge, and how did you kind of decide, like, the right size, the amount of deserting you wanted to do, and how did you end up on this amount?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there was an overt discussion about let's put in X deserts. I think we wanted to have a desert package for constructed, so in addition to the dual deserts, we wanted some utility deserts that would do various things, and also creatures that cared about them. I think we generally wanted to keep the 5-color deserts archetype to be something like the 5-color gates archetype in Ravnica Allegiance, where it's something you could do sometimes, and we gave you a little support for it, but wasn't a full-on archetype.
So you identified the archetype early on in Vision Design, and then later when Dave Humphries was leading the set in set design, I imagine it's kind of when you kind of started to fine-tune that vision a little bit, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of these sorts of sideways archetypes come down to specific numbers and adjustments to individual cards, and that's something you handle in set design.
Very cool. All right, so that is deserts down. Now let's move on to a new mechanic. I know this is another one we probably wanted really early on, and that is saddle. Tell me about this.
Yes, we knew we wanted something representing mounts from the very beginning. This was probably the most difficult mechanic that we worked on. Saddle changed many times. I know in Vision, we were trying something similar to Mutate, where you always put the mount on the bottom of the other creature, and the creature was saddling it.
Oh, that would have been so cool. You like put it underneath, and it's like you're riding the horse. That's awesome.
Something I was pushing for in Vision Design when we were working on this mechanic is the mount makes the rider cooler and not vice versa. Because if you see this in Westerns, like, you look at a cool cowboy on a horse, you don't think, oh, that horse is really neat. This is a place where gameplay overrules the flavor being exactly correct. There was a different team that was trying out mechanics for mounts and riders, and they came up with this, which is similar to crewing a vehicle. We found that this was functional, it was simple, it solved one of the problems of having to use up a creature to go underneath another creature and then you lose board presence. So we ended up switching to this in early set design, and we got a lot of functional designs out of it. I'm happy to see the green-white saddle archetype is doing well in Limited. It's novel, and we didn't know how it would land, but people seem to be having fun with it.
Yeah, I love that if you know vehicles, it's pretty easy to learn how mounts work, but they play quite a bit differently because they're always creatures.
Yeah, it makes the floor a lot higher. It means that you'll always have something. You always have a creature to block with, even if you can't get maximum value out of it.
Right, it's like, oh, this is a 3-mana 3/3, but it also can just have this extra bonus on top of it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I like about Saddle is that it provides what I like to call creature sync. In a lot of limited gameplay, you'll end up with a large board of some creatures that are irrelevant, and it's nice to have mechanics that can clean them up, either by sacrificing them, so Bargain and Exploit are examples of previous creature sync mechanics, or by tapping them. So Saddle will allow you to make use of creatures that aren't doing much. They can't attack profitably. The best they would do is chump block, but now you can get some value out of your mount.
And it's also nice that complexity-wise, too, that also takes those creatures out of the equation for blocking, so you don't have to worry about chump blocking if you use them, which is smart. I like that idea of, like we have talked about mana sinks a lot, but having a creature sinks is like a nice little philosophy, too.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of them in future sets as well.
Well, perfect. Well, maybe we'll see Saddle come back someday. We'll have to wait and find out. But let's move on to our next mechanic called Plot. So what is the history of Plot? When did this one get added?
Plot is a very interesting mechanic. So this started off as a top-down heist mechanic. So you would store things in the vault, basically, which at times was Exile, at times was a brand new zone. And you would jump through some hoop to get the thing out of the vault for free. Sometimes it would be a universal thing, like if you dealt damage to your opponent, you would get everything out of your vault. Sometimes each thing in the vault would have its own conditions. So one thing would be like, if you have 8 lands, you get me out of the vault. At some point, you could even store tokens in the vault. So there would be like 2 mercenaries in there, and then if you dealt combat damage to your opponent, you got the mercenaries. It was very complex and wasn't particularly fun to play, so we struggled with it. When we got feedback from the Vision Summit, the vault was the one mechanic they didn't like, and we sort of knew that going in. And then one day, Mark Rosewater comes to the meeting, and he says, I had a great idea. What if it's just, you can pay mana to exile this, and then you can cast it for free on a later turn? And we really liked the idea. Unusually for a mechanic, a lot of the things we pitched after we heard this mechanic, just to see what the boundaries were, remained in the file. Black Snag Buzzard and Highway Robbery are 2 cards that are close to unchanged from the original submission. The one thing that changed was the sorcery speed restriction on when you can cast the card. That was for cards like Make Your Own Luck that allow you to plot cards that wouldn't normally have plot. It generally isn't fun to have access to instant speed removal that's visible and your opponent knows is coming. So by having everything be sorcery speed, it allowed us to open the boundaries of what you could plot.
And talk to me a little bit about why it's not fun to have instant speed removal face up. I just, I guess, explain that one to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. If you know your opponent has a removal spell ready that they can cast for free at any time, it's good strategy to sandbag all of your good cards until they use it up. And generally in Magic, it's more fun if we encourage you to play your cards.
Now, one other thing you touched on there, you said something very quickly, but I want to go back to it because I think it's quite interesting. You said Vision Summit. Can you explain what the Vision Summit is? Because a lot of people have probably never even heard of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Vision Summit is a new meeting that we added. I think Outlaws of Thunder Junction was the first set to have a Vision Summit. It comes about 3/4 of the way through Vision. And what happens is Magic leadership and a bunch of representatives from everyone that touches a Magic set in Studio X. So that includes play design, that includes creative, that includes a bunch of people who normally work on sets but weren't on this one, come in and we draft the set, and then we get feedback on whether people think the mechanics are good and the set can move forward, or if it needs a lot of reworking. For Outlaws of Thunder Junction, people felt the vault wasn't working out. Every other mechanic they generally liked, and I would call Outlaws of Thunder Junction one of the more successful Vision Summits. Of course, having a successful and unsuccessful Vision Summit doesn't define whether a set's going to be good or bad. It just determines whether it needs a little more time in Vision and possibly needs some extra eyes on it.
Right, like successful and unsuccessful are almost kind of the wrong terms in a sense, right? Like a set could get a lot of marks of like, hey, stuff needs to change, and that can be a very successful Vision Summit because it's like, oh, I learned a lot about how my set has to evolve and change, right? All right, so the next mechanic I want to talk about has plenty of choices, and that is Spree. When did this get added, and what's the story behind it?
So Spree originally came from Vision Design. We did an exercise in Vision Designs to see if there were any returning mechanics we'd like to see in the set. One of the ones that we came up with that we were very happy about is Escalate from Eldritch Moon. We wanted more opportunities to have crimes in the set, and Escalate allowed us to attach things that targeted your opponents on effects that normally wouldn't target your opponents. We also liked the name Escalate because it gave a very heist flavor. It's like you're starting out doing petty crimes, then you work your way all the way up to robbing banks. We put a bunch of Escalate cards into the set and started testing with them. And although they were fun, we became frustrated with the fact that we had to weigh every mode at about the same mana value for Escalate, because you can choose any of them. Rosewater eventually came up with the idea of a modal card with weighted modes, where you can pay different amounts of mana to get different effects. So this opened up a lot more space. It allows us to put an effect that costs 5 mana and an effect that costs 2 mana on the same card. And we were able to make a lot of interesting effects using that framework.
So you've mentioned a couple times this set has some strong villains vibes, and of course that brings us to Outlaws. So talk to us about the outlaw mechanic in Outlaws of Thunder Junction.
Yes, so Outlaws was a concept that Rosewater came up with midway through Vision. If you haven't figured it out by now, Rosewater was absolutely on fire this set. He made a bunch of great mechanics. We had an outlaw creature type in briefly, but we wanted something more backwards compatible. So we came up with a batch of villainous feeling creature types. Originally, it was rogues, warlocks, assassins, and mercenaries. We added pirates in later, partially so there could be some standard overlap with the large amount of pirate cards in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and because we wanted Malcolm and Breaches as returning villains in the set, and they have to be pirates. We originally picked rogues, assassins, and warlocks because those were fairly common creature types in previous Magic sets. We added mercenaries in later because of the mercenary token. We wanted that to be counted as an outlaw.
Well, speaking of the mercenary token, tell me about that, because that's like a secret mechanic. It's not really a name mechanic, but there's plenty of them rolling around in the set.
Yeah, mercenaries were designed to capture one of the core elements of a villain-themed set, which is you need a bunch of replaceable mooks wandering around, or henchmen, or goons, or however you want to call them. So we tried a big band of things that had to attack and block together. I think this was similar to an early attempt at Amass in War of the Spark. We eventually came up with this version based on the Innistrad Crimson Vow card, Traveling Minister. Traveling Minister was generally considered a fun card, and we liked how this empowered your named villains and made them more powerful. We felt it gave a good sense of your henchmen teaming up to make the boss stronger.
That's pretty cool. Any reason why mercenary in particular? That's a type that we haven't seen a lot of recently. Did you bring back mercenaries because it was a great flavor fit instead of using one of the other ones, or is there any reason you wanted to tap into that particular?
Yeah, I think it was mercenary to capture the Western feel as well. I believe it was minion early in the file, but it didn't give quite the right feel that Dave wanted. So he changed it to mercenaries, and I think it was a good change.
Now, it's not really a mechanic per se, but there is a very strange draft archetype in this set I wanted to ask about, Jeremy, and that is the blue-white no spells archetype, where you just kind of pass the turn to your opponent. Can you tell us about the evolution of that limited archetype?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was one card in the set at Vision Handoff that gave you a benefit if you didn't cast a spell that turn. That was obviously intended for playing with plot, where you could take your entire turn off to plot a card and get your benefit, and then cast it later. Dave Humphries was very interested in the play pattern that card enabled, so he blew it out to an entire archetype in set design, moving it to white-blue because those were also colors that had access to flash. One thing we were careful about when we were designing cards for this archetype is making sure that the card didn't incentivize you to pass turn over turn over turn. So many of these cards give you a one-shot bonus. Others have flash themselves or in some other way enable you to spend your mana. Some of the mana sinks like Prairie Dog. The archetype was one of our most experimental, so I'm happy it turned out to be reasonably functional and fun to play with. I'm not sure if we can do it in another set without access to something like plot, because having a built-in mana sink on a lot of cards is what made the archetype fun, but I wouldn't be surprised if it showed up in another set that had the ability to handle it.
All right, very cool. Well, that's the mechanics we see in the set, Jeremy. I am curious, because you were on the set for almost the entire time, do you have any favorite cards you made that made it all the way through?
Well, I'm very happy people like Obeka Splitter Seconds. I'm very happy with the way Black Snag Buzzard and Highway Robbery played out in Limited. I think they're shapes of cards you wouldn't normally consider for your deck, but the plot mechanic makes them a lot more versatile and interesting. And the card I'm most excited to put into my personal decks is Goldvein Hydra.
Ooh, why Goldvein Hydra?
Well, I have a Magus Lucia Kane X Matters deck, and that's about the end of it. I'm excited to play Hydras that explode in treasure.
So through this whole process, Jeremy, you got to work with some true luminaries of game design, right? You got to work with Mark Rosewater on the vision design side, where he was the lead, and Dave Humphries on the set design side, who was the lead of this set. I know a lot of people out there would love to work with folks like this. What was your experience working with Rosewater and Humphries on the set?
Rosewater was a lot of fun to work with. He focused a lot on capturing tone and feel and making a lot of cute top-downs, which is something I generally enjoy doing anyway. He was very good about finding new directions to go into when we had exhausted a line of thinking. Dave Humphries is very focused on executing everything right. Dave is a very thoughtful designer. He doesn't give a lot of extreme opinions, and he makes sure to take everything into consideration before he signs off on something. He's also very committed on maintaining the vision, so to speak, of the vision lead and making the set that they wanted to make as well.
Very cool. I mean, two true luminaries of game design, and it's awesome that on kind of your first draft team here at Wizards, you got to work with both of them. So what a cool process to be a part of. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jeremy, today. Any last parting words of OTJ, wisdom, or other design insights you want to share before we break for the day?
We used to have a red-green treasures archetype. We eventually found out both from our own testing and from lessons taught by Streets of New Capenna that having an archetype that allows you to splash for 3 other colors is not really worth the effort, but a lot of cute cards from that design ended up making it into the main file. So things like Gold Rush, Hell to Pay, Jolene, and even Magda are all holdovers from our old treasure archetype. Even though we don't have the archetype anymore, treasure still has a bigger footprint in the set than as usual.
Awesome. Well, a cool little bit of insight there at the end from you, Jeremy. Well, thank you so much for joining us and coming on the show today. It was awesome to have you, and hopefully we'll see you back again. What's like the next set you worked on you feel like you could talk about with us?
I was on Vision Design for Bloomborough, and then I was on Duskmourn for Vision set.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And it's really cool for you to share your expertise with us, and we'll see you again again soon, I'm sure. If you have any thoughts for Jeremy, let him know in the comments down below. I'll talk with you again soon, and in the meantime, have a lot of fun trying to see something from the beginning all the way to the end. And remember, everybody, you got this. Manage you as quickly as possible with, like a goblin bushwhacker, and you have you make a bunch of tokens, and you do that. And this deck is more like build up some artifacts, kill you from hand with all the glitters, or slap down early all the glitters, make a huge creature. So the kind of removal that's good against the 2 decks is very different, right? You want pinpoint removal often against all the glitters.